Playgoers, I bid you welcome. The theater is a temple, and we are here to worship the gods of comedy and tragedy. Tonight, I am pleased to announce a comedy. We shall employ every device we know in our desire to divert you. Something familiar, something peculiar, something for everyone, a comedy tonight. Nothing
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Chen. It can feel hard, even impossible, to lean into laughter at a time of so much uncertainty. But sometimes comedy can help us make sense of the world. At least, that's what today's guest will say. We're talking about the art of satire and how comedy can help with political dialogue and even healing. Joining us now from CT Comedy Theater and CT Improv Studios are Ali Rivera and Jenna Harvey. Thank you so much for joining us today.
So glad to be here.
And with us as well is Dr. Sophia A. McLennan. She's a professor of international affairs and comparative literature and director of the Center for Global Studies at Penn State University. Sophia, thank you for being on the show today as well.
Thanks for having me.
And listeners, we want to hear from you. Let us know if you have a joke you want to share with us or what's making you laugh right now. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or drop us a joke on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Sophia, I want to kick off the show with you. Can you tell us what do we know about the role of comedy during uncertain times?
Well, we know a few things. One of the things that we know is that in moments of historical crisis, we'll actually see an increase in comedy, and particularly in political satire. So it's an interesting sort of counterpoint, because you think maybe in a moment of crisis, no one wants to laugh. And it's not really about the need to laugh, although, of course, our guests will show us why that is critical. It's also that political satire allows us to work through difficult political ideas in a space that includes irony and that can often shield comedians and their audiences from repercussions.
And have we seen comedy used to respond to other times of political unrest or even as a tool for social movements?
Yeah, I mean, listeners will want to remember the 60s. So the thing that is sort of the iconic moment, especially because we now have a significant percentage of television as in addition to radio and print out there for people to consume. And think back on things like The Smothers Brothers, which was a show that was very, very aggressive in critiquing the U.S.'s war in Vietnam. And so they used sketches, they used jokes, they used satirical quips to really get messages out there. And it became so intense that eventually their show was canceled. So that's a really good example so people could remember that. The story of the White House watching what happens in the space of satire is not new to this present moment. And so we have a lot of examples of that. And I think really the one that parallels the best is the 60s. But the other time to think about would be after 9/11. Remember, Bill Maher got his show canceled because he made a comment that people found too offensive for the moment. And again, we've also had in more recent times a number of political cartoonists fired from their jobs. So, this is not, the U.S. has a long and complex history of this.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when we were first talking about this conversation, the first thing I thought about was the sketches, was political cartoons, and how we have such a long history there, and now we have so many forms of comedy today, from sketch comedy to stand-up and to improv.
This guy being the president, it's like there's a horse loose in a hospital. It's like there's a horse loose in a hospital.
But I'm back in the White House just in time. Everything is back to how it was, except now my new favorite son is Barron, and he is smacking his head on every door frame. Oh, it's bad. It's like when Gandalf goes to Bilbo's house. And the inauguration was a tremendous success. It was inside due to cold and fear. But we had a lot of surprise guests like Melania. That was nice.
Yes, former President Obama was there. George Bush seemed kind of there. Definitely high. Only Michelle Obama seemed to have the consistent ethical stance of saying, when they go low, I stay the home. I don't care.
So those were clips from John Mulaney, Saturday Night Live, and Jon Stewart. Sophia, can you talk about how are these all different styles of comedy effective for tackling difficult subject matters in present time?
So, yes, that's the quick answer. But what they do is varied based on the type of comedy. So, the type of comedy will elicit different reactions. What you're seeing in some cases is just that need for a collective laugh. So, when you feel that you're in a moment of historical crisis, it's really common to get depressed and to feel isolated. So, comedy can be a very good unifying way of not feeling alone. So that sense of that joke, I always ask people, think about what do you share? What are the clips that or things that you share on your Instagram or TikTok or whatever? It's often something funny. So humor has that community building element. So that we know, that's fantastic. But there's other things that we heard in those clips that are really different. And that's that satirical bite, that ironic wit, that way of framing information so that the public can say, I kind of thought that, but now I'm feeling it. It's more obvious to me. So one of the best examples I like to give is when Stephen Colbert coined the term truthiness on his opening episode of the Colbert Report at a time when the public felt that the Bush administration wasn't being honest. What Colbert did with the term truthiness was give us a public vocabulary, a word we could use, and a way we could frame this issue. And so that's probably one of the most powerful things that satire can do. It really frames the narrative and helps the public think about things differently.
Well, and with that idea too, why do you think laughing at a situation or maybe even mocking a difficult situation can actually be productive?
Well, so this is the question that, in fact, is the place where satire has two sides to it. Because when you laugh, for example, when Alec Baldwin would impersonate Trump in the first administration, it does have this collective element where it helps those that are critical of Trump, but it also irritates people who really like Trump. So we call that satire is what we call boundary heightening humor. So most comedy increases social divisions at some level because it's based on I'm over here making fun of this thing over there. And so if you're supportive of the thing I'm making fun of, you will be offended. So satire is going to do that. And we saw that. It increases political polarization in many circumstances. In some cases, we can see it not doing that. But in the case of, for example, making fun of Trump, it will do that. But what it also does is it energizes and it pulls people out of depression, in part because your mind enjoys processing comedy. And so there's this countervailing effect. So you have to weigh it. In fact, I have lots of research that shows the pros and cons and the actual impact of using these kinds of jokes on the public.
Well, and the stage for comedy is really broad, right? Where comedians, artists, the sketches can range far and wide, and especially based with what you're saying, it's almost a little bit everything is quote unquote fair game to a certain extent. There are some big comedians today who complain about political correctness, going as far as saying that it's ruining comedy. What should we make of that? Our audience more into comedy today that punches up versus punching down.
So for example, one of the places you'd look for would be like, what do we make of Dave Chappelle when he seems to be making jokes that are really aggressive and sort of make people uncomfortable about the trans community? Mm-hmm. We have examples of this recently. And, at the end of the day, comedy is going to always have that. It's always going to push on what those lines are. If people are never getting offended, then it's usually not powerful comedy. It's instead self-deprecating comedy. I can come out and make fun of myself, and that's fine, but that's not really politically powerful. So if I'm making the kind of comedy that has a statement to it, I will always run the risk of offending people. So that, I mean, I kind of like to encourage people to just get used to it. I mean, and guess what? You don't.
Go for it.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting topic to me and Allie. I'll just go ahead and speak for you, Allie, because we teach comedy. We teach people how to do comedy, and we teach people how to do a very specific collaborative art form, right? That is something that you can't do alone and that you don't have time to like hone in a room where you write something down, you ask like, is this actually saying what I want it to do? And so we talk about like quote unquote offensive comedy all the time. And we actually work really hard to distinguish between offensive comedy and oppressive comedy. Because, right, offensive comedy, someone is emotionally hurt by it, right? And that can cover a really wide range of things. But that doesn't mean that the idea that's being expressed itself is necessarily like doing harm in the world writ large. So the example that I always give is like, accountants are boring. Or lawyers are like mean, greedy sharks. And, there could be an accountant in the audience who says, wow, that's so hurtful. I'm a very interesting person. My stamp collection is really interesting. And the idea that accountants are boring, it hurts accountants. It makes it hard for me to date. I'm offended by that.
I love that you use that as an example because I have a family of accountants.
Oh, no. All right. I'm never invited over to your house.
No, and then they were never like, Kat, you need to go into this. It's not my thing anyway.
That's good.
Yeah, but just a reminder that we were just listening to Brenna Harvey, who's an instructor and performer at CT Comedy. And Allie, did you want to add to that too? Who's also an instructor and performing at CT Comedy Theater.
Yeah, I mean, just echoing what Brenna is saying, when we're talking about oppressive comedy versus offensive comedy, accountants are not a group of people who've been historically marginalized. There have not really been laws about trying to make accountants not exist anymore. So making jokes about those types of group of people, sure, some people will get offended, which could toe a line, and that might be necessary. But we
won't get invited to the annual National Accounting Conference.
Or maybe they should not go and see the producers, where there are songs written about accountants.
Yes. So, but we talk about what we call trash comedy, and that's comedy that's transphobic, racist, ageist, and ableist, sexist, and homophobic. And these groups of people who've been historically oppressed and marginalized, they've had enough on their plate. We don't need to be making jokes at their expense. That feels like it's punching down and closer to bullying than actual comedy. And so that is something that we focus a lot on in our classes.
Yeah, there's a comedian, I think his name's Barry Feldman, and he had a tweet that went kind of viral that said, the whole idea, like, no one can take a joke anymore. And he was like, yeah, man, it's just a joke. It's just a joke. It's just one of the most digestible and powerful pieces of persuasive rhetoric a human being can communicate, get over it, man. And so jokes, they can absolutely do harm. Like, they can reinforce ideas, really harmful ideas, right? Ideas that like women are overly emotional and incapable of being full equal members of civic society, right? Queer people are deviants and they're in some way like predatory or mentally disturbed, or people of the global majority are in some way criminal or untrustworthy. Like, these are like deeply held prejudices, and these ideas and beliefs do real harm in the world. So when we try to talk about oppressive comedy, that's really what we're kind of trying to dismantle.
Well, I'm glad you're bringing that up because that's something that we want to dig deep into a little bit. And I also want to ask both of you about your improv experience. But before we get to that, Sophia, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, so what we're talking about here is the difference between a satirist and a jerk.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I actually have an infographic that's in one of my books, and we're going to use it again, where we basically say, here's how you can tell the difference between, right, somebody who's doing political comedy and somebody who's just a jerk. And so we do have a culture where people will often say something offensive, see you get offended, and say, I was just kidding. So I call it the Colbert defense, which is what Alex Jones did, for example. He said, no, I wasn't being serious. I was just kidding. And so I feel like, especially with all due respect to the professional comedians in the room, we want to remind people that just saying it was a joke, it does not absolve you of saying something outrageous and offensive, right? And so I want us to kind of keep those ideas separate and notice that, in fact, you will see a lot of that. You will see people try to back out of being, of doing things that are inappropriate and like you said, offensive, oppressive, by saying that the problem here is that you don't have a good sense of humor. And that, of course, is an insult to humor.
Well, we know our listeners, we have a lot of different kinds of senses of humors out there. So we would love to hear if there's a meme or maybe a funny movie or a fun TikTok video that you'd like to share with us. Let us know. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Brenna, I would love to start with you here in terms of asking you just about your background of improv. How did you get into it? How did you start?
So I was a really shy, nerdy kid, but was also really desperate for positive attention of some kind, but didn't want to be known, didn't want people to actually look at me and be able to judge me. So, of course, the performing arts, that's the obvious answer. And I took an improv class with my little sister in high school, and it was just a kids' improv class. And the moment where I realized it was for me was the suggestion that we got was I had to do a Crocodile Hunter impression. I don't know if y'all remember Steve Irwin, classic nature documentarian, put himself in all kinds of wild situations to teach us about nature. And so I did a Crocodile Hunter and wrestled a croc and destroyed the room. I flipped a table, threw a bunch of chairs. And the teacher was like, Brenna, of all the children in this class, if I had to guess who would flip a table before it was over, you would have been last on the list. And I was like, yes, this is a space where I can be truly alive.
Well, we appreciate it if you don't flip our table today.
It's too heavy. There's too much sound equipment on it.
The heavy table here. So.
Allie, what about you?
I was not a shy kid. I was constantly convinced that I was going to be famous when I was a child. But I didn't discover improv until I was about 26. I was living back home with my parents. I had finished grad school, but was working at Starbucks, and I just needed something to do. And people had been like, why don't you take an improv class? And I knew nothing about it, but I Googled and I found CT Improv. And now, over 10 years later, here I am, still doing it. It just was something that really spoke to me as a way to express myself and just be silly and fun in a way that adults are not often allowed to just be silly.
We don't get to play ever.
Yeah. It's I feel like it's made me a much stronger a stronger adult. Sounds like a strange way to phrase it, but in the workplace, among family, I'm much more adaptable and willing to make things just be fun and silly for the sake of being fun and silly. So I've been doing it ever since.
It does feel like most of us are embracing the silliness a bit more. I wonder if it's a generational thing too, where we're allowing ourselves more space to do that as you say, quote, quote, adults. I think the limits are a little bit different now. I feel like, as anecdotally talking to friends and family, and earlier Sophia had talked a little bit about how sketch cartoons, political satire has evolved over time in history. Brenna, how have you seen improv evolve over time? Especially going through different social movements and also a global pandemic.
Yeah, I think there is a willingness to think deeply about the kind of comedy that we're doing and the ideas that we're reinforcing on stage that I think really comes from having multiple kind of mass cultural reckonings with historical oppression. I think about the power of the Me Too movement, talking about how violence against women, it's really, it happens because it is supported and encouraged and kind of tacitly endorsed by culture, right? The ideas about how women are in the world absolutely affects them in interpersonal relationships and things like that, and in the workplace and in power dynamics. Or I think about Black Lives Matter, really trying to reckon with the deeply, deeply held racism in our culture. So I think that people are more willing to question, what ideas am I expressing and reinforcing with the comedy that I'm doing on stage? And people can do that without feeling like it's a drag.
Yeah.
People can do that and say, actually, this is really thought-provoking, and this makes me a more empathetic and compassionate and interesting person, that I'm having these conversations and that it's sort of part of my comedic practice.
Well, and Allie, building on that with the comedic practice and being on stage, how do you think about current events and how do you incorporate them into your act?
Sure. it's a regular occurrence at our shows that if we ask for some kind of suggestion, people will shout out whatever is in the popular zeitgeist.
Oh my God, twerking was our suggestion for 10 years, for a decade. It was the only thing we got was twerking.
Wow, it lasted that long?
So long, because it's like
long time.
people who are like, oh, this is funny, and then people who are behind are like, this is still funny, right?
But during the first Trump administration, we constantly would get just Trump as the example of something that we wanted. And it got to the point where I would just say, like, you don't actually want to see that. You've been watching that all day on the news. You want to see something else. But I have to say, it has been in many ways almost a cathartic feeling to be able to join with people who have similar ideas. My brain is jumping to, we did a Pride sketch show where all of the sketches were written and performed by LGBTQIA plus people. And to get everyone in a room laughing about these shared experiences that are otherwise, kind of tough to deal with day to day, but to be with people who understand and be able to laugh about them feels cathartic. It feels healing. It feels bonding. And so being able to have those opportunities week to week at our theater has meant so much to me throughout all of these, what's the phrase that they're always saying, like, in
these unprecedented times.
Yes, these unprecedented times that we've been having
now more than ever.
Yeah, those are vocabs that we try to avoid just because it's so used. I'm sure people are tired.
Oh yeah, when you hear it in like a Chevy commercial or whatever, then it's like, okay, maybe this has lost all meaning.
Well, there's a theme of, I think, the word tired, and also the fact that a joke or an idea can last for so long. Sophia, you recently wrote an article for Salon called "Sick of Trump, Try Laughing at Him." So we're a week into the second Trump administration. How have you been thinking about comedy this past week?
Yeah, that's a big question. So I think what your guests are pointing out is that there's this collective community building element, but the work that I focus on is a lot more about political efficacy and how it can change political behavior. So we know that, for example, mobilizing in ways that allow people to think about the Trump administration through satire has really powerful effects. It allows people, one of the things that we see that's really interesting is it increases people's confidence in their understanding and knowledge of issues. So let's take one example. If we look at contemporary, if people are watching, contemporary cable news, or they're listening to sort of a lot of the radio stuff out there, they're going to hear, oh, Trump's a fascist. Here's the fascists. And they're hearing this word all the time. Recently, Jon Stewart did a bit, and he's like, let's just understand what fascism is. It's not everything that Trump does. Occasionally, there's some things that you would want to worry about. But in other cases, this is him actually doing the job that he was elected to do. And you might not like it, but you shouldn't use that, dislike and put the label fascism, because we're going to get confused about what this term means. Right. And so he did a really good bit on this, and it was funny and it was sharp and it was insightful. And people that would have watched that little segment would feel more confident that they understood, hey, we have a problem, but it's not what the media is telling me. It's not hysteria. It's not scandal. It's not disaster. I'm going to think about this intelligently. And so what we see is that can then translate itself into people being more politically active in various ways, whether it's donating, going on a protest. It gets them out and it gets them active. And so that correlation between the consumption of satire and political behaviors is really quite high. And that's the stuff that I think is the most encouraging when we think about these issues.
Well, and before we go to break, I do want to dig in a little bit about what you just said, because I think it's important to recognize if laughter is helpful across the political spectrum, can it be used to bring people of different ideologies together?
Yeah, so this is actually goes again to what your guests were talking about in terms of their community space. It's what the nerds call issue priming. So you might have somebody in the audience who is literally like, I don't want to think about this. Like, I just want to have a nice night. I don't want to think about the climate. Ew. But if you do jokes that sort of slowly move people to think about issues, or you create a space where they don't feel like they're being judged, where they can come at an issue through humor and through a collective laugh, you can see some real change. And one example was there was a study that was done that showed the real impact of the show Queer Eye on how suddenly people were softening certain ideas they had towards the gay community through watching this show that didn't push them to, question their ideas about an issue. It just brought them to think about things through humor. So we know that that works. We know that it has that sort of social priming, softening barriers when it's done effectively.
You were just listening to Dr. Sophia A. McLennan, who's a professor of international affairs and comparative literature at Penn State University. And also with us today is Ali Rivera and Brenna Harvey of CT Improv in Hartford. They'll be staying with us. And listeners, we would love to hear from you. Let us know what's making you laugh these days. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. When's the last time you laughed? Like full body, couldn't catch your breath laughed. Today, we're leaning into laughter and hopefully get some laughs out of you today. Research shows that laughter can actually be good for your physical and mental health. So if you've been feeling a little stressed out, make some room in your day to laugh. Still with us today is Ali Rivera and Brenna Harvey. They're both instructors and performers at CT Comedy Theater in Hartford. And also with us is Dr. Sophia A. McLennan, who's a professor of international affairs and comparative literature at Penn State University. So, Sophia, I want to jump straight to you here. We've been talking a lot about the power of comedy. Do you think there have been times that comedy has been so effective that it's actually become a tool to spur political action?
Yes, we have some interesting examples of that. A lot of the research that I've been doing more recently looks specifically at how activist groups can mobilize comedy, what you might call laughtivism, to change, to get the political change that they want. So one of the kind of classic stories is one of my collaborators, Srđan Popović, a Serbian, as a young student, was part of a political movement attempting to bring down Slobodan Milosevic. Now, bringing down a dictator is a really hard thing to do. And you would think using comedy can't possibly be helpful. But in their case, it really was. So they would do these public stunts where they would incorporate humorous pranks. And suddenly someone who seemed scary, Milosevic, seemed like the butt of a joke. We see some of this, for example, today in Russia, where you're not allowed to protest. And so instead, what people do is they set up Lego toys holding the signs they wish they could, hold publicly. And then this draws media attention. It gets the message out there. So this sort of research on the efficacy of laughtivism is showing that counterintuitively, incorporating these kinds of elements has really significant impact, not just in increasing the members and public sympathy for the group, but in doing what you really want, which is discrediting your target, right? So if you can make your target, who is currently seems scary, not scary, but funny, right? Then you really can get quite a lot of, solid effects. And so we have tons and tons of examples of how this works.
And Ali, we'd love to give your thoughts in terms of, in addition to being a tool for political activism, comedy, do you think can also promote healing and understanding? And what does that look like in an improv space?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been able to offer spaces for various groups of people who maybe don't have others who are like them to be able to come together and just laugh. Like I was saying earlier, being able to have shared experiences that when processing by yourself can feel negative or isolating or lonely. But if you have others that you are sharing that experience with and you're able to just make a joke about this common experience that people have had, it can feel healing. It makes it feel as though it's not as daunting. I had just read a study that popped up on my social media feed about people who were tasked with climbing a mountain when they were with friends and loved ones, gauged that mountain as not being as steep as those who were facing it alone. And I feel like you can really take that concept into this broader idea of having people with you makes it feel as though it's easier to move forward against these issues.
Absolutely. So I think about after the overturning of Roe versus Wade, CT Improv, a bunch of us staged a reproductive justice improv show. And what we really tried to do was highlight the absurdity of what we're facing, of reproductive rights being under attack and basic bodily autonomy being under attack. And we did this in ways that we framed our improv games. So there's a classic improv game called Director Producer, where you do a scene, you're doing a fake movie, a made-up movie that's never been done before, and every once in a while the director will jump in with artistic notes that it's like, no, you need to do it with this accent, or we're swapping you out for this actor, and the producer will come in concerned about the money. So it's, we need to fit in this product placement or something like that. And so we changed director producer to U.S. Supreme Court Justice and U.S. Senator, because, of course, the Supreme Court Justice was there to undo every choice you had tried to make, and the U.S. Senator was there to cut funding to the arts. And it's just, so same framework of game, still do the scene, but your choices get second guessed, they get taken away, they get undone. And just that kind of as a way to sort of coalesce and frame what we had all been experiencing collectively and how ridiculous and absurd and unfair it felt, made it a really effective comedy, and everyone being able to laugh. The laughter was yes, we hate this.
Well, and I think this reflects what Sophia was sharing earlier. And before we go to break, Sophia, would love to get some thoughts from you just based on what Brenna and Ali have been sharing.
Yeah, so you're seeing this, that moment of the laugh is really just the smallest part of the impact. The impact is that suddenly this person they feel sort of affirmed in their belief system, and they feel that they're right. And the reason why this works is that when you're in an oppressive system, the system says, I'm doing this and it's in your best interest. But the comedy can help you say, no, it's really not in my best interest. And that pivot is very, very, very gratifying and politically effective.
You're listening to Sophia McLennan, who is from Penn State University, and also Ali Rivera and Brenna Harvey from CT Improv in Hartford. We have to take a short break, but you can join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live, where you can tell us what was casting that made you laugh. And FYI, that Connecticut Public is having its February pledge drive. Consider donating and supporting Where We Live and all of your favorite programming here at Connecticut Public. And you can visit ctpublic.org/donate. And I'll be right back to tell you more.
Smile, pick out a pleasant outlook, stick out that noble chin, wipe off that full of doubt look, slap on a happy grin, and spread sunshine all over the place. Just put on a happy face.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today, we're talking about how laughter can help us build community, spark conversation, and even heal. Still with us is Ali Rivera and Brenna Harvey from CT Comedy Theater in Hartford. And also with us is Sophia A. McLennan, who's a professor of international affairs and comparative literature at Penn State University. So we're going to end the program today with a quick improv game, everyone. And it's called Say What. Brenna, tell us how we play this.
So this is a classic improv game called Say What or Line Change, where you do a scene and every once in a while a host might shout out,
Say what?
And then you have to change what you just did. So it might look a little something like, hey, Ali, what did you have for breakfast today?
I actually didn't have anything.
Say what?
I made a giant waffle
Great. We changed it so Allie made sure to get her nutrients. So that's how
waffle.
Exactly. You did have breakfast, as you should. So that's the new reality. Allie did eat breakfast. She had a waffle, and that's how the game works.
All right, want to kick us off, Brenna?
Yeah, so we're going to do this. It's pledge season, so
Yes,
we're
it
going to
is.
do this pledge drive style. So Allie and I, we are joining the crew here at WNPR to help you fund public radio.
Say what?
We're here to help you fund people talking about whatever they feel like, right, Allie?
Absolutely. We are very pro people talking about just whatever comes to top of mind. And so today we're actually going to focus on making sure we're raising funds for Connecticut Public.
Say what?
We're going to make sure we're raising funds for the state of Connecticut to just secede from the rest of the country.
Say what?
We're raising funds to make sure that we can get everyone in the state of puppy.
Say what?
We're raising funds to make sure that everyone can have someone just show up at their door and maybe just give them a little kiss on the mouth.
And we are raising funds for you to be able to get tote bags without having to support public radio. That's right. We know the people of Connecticut, they love nothing better than a sturdy tote bag
love a good
with some
tote
kind
bag.
of clever saying on it.
It's true.
So what can you get today if you support this, but you don't get a tote bag for funding this? We're going to get tote bags at the end of it.
Wait, say what?
We are taking these tote bags and we are putting them over our heads and we're just screaming out our feelings today, Allie. I am so excited for this.
There's nothing quite like a good primal scream into a well-used tote bag. And so if you call in now, we're actually going to send you 8 of them to have your own primal screams into. So you can just use those for 8 different screams. You can stack them on top of each other for one extremely large primal scream.
Allie, I hear you have an excellent primal scream. You just shout something really, really powerful that I think our listeners would love to hear.
Yes, of course. When I need to have just a good primal scream, I'll just give like a good
And say what scene? I was about, when you said primal scream, I was so tempted to ask you all to just scream into the void because we are kind of talking into the void right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've done a good primal scream before for some rehearsals just to get it out, you know?
And we'll do one after the show.
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe
Well,
not into a microphone.
Preferably not. That would be a very rude awakening for this time in the hour, in the morning. Sophia, you've been following along with Improv Game, and of course, we've been digging a lot into comedy this hour. We'll love to get some final thoughts, but before we do that, I also want to ask real quick. We've been talking about a lot about laughter being sort of a way to understand the political landscape maybe a little bit better. What about when it comes to being stressed? You know, when you're stressed in an environment or stressed out in your lives, really, does comedy play a big role in that?
That's a really interesting question because, you know, some people will laugh when they're anxious.
Right.
In those cases, that laughter actually isn't necessarily helping them with their anxiety. It's a manifestation of it. So it's important to recognize that. Sometimes you might be talking to someone and they go, ha, and that reaction is not what we're hoping for. It's not a cathartic laugh. But in general, we do see a connection between laughter and a reduction of anxiety and fear. Bassem Youssef, the famous satirist who used to be called the Jon Stewart of Egypt and who lives now in the United States, talks about how, you know, when you're laughing, you cannot be afraid. And so there is something very powerful about that folks should think about in any moment when they're feeling stressed out.
We got a couple minutes here, so we'd love to get Allie and Brenna's thoughts on the same question. You know, what do you think about comedy in terms of maybe de-stressing us?
So important. And I think especially important to help de-stress us and help with that feeling of helplessness during times of political upheaval. I think about the day after the 2016 election, Allie, when we did an improv performance at the New England Museum Association. So day after the 2016 election, we performed for, I think, like 500 museum professionals.
It was in the grand ballroom of the hotel.
And we're never in any grand anything.
No.
So a bunch of people who were really stressed out about cultural institutions being defunded, people who were worried about threats to evidence-based history, and just people who were really worried. And before us were two really amazing performances, one about Indigenous history, one about Black women's history, that I think got people feeling like the importance of history, like the work we're doing, it's so vital, and we need to make sure we keep doing it, we keep fighting the good fight. And then we got up there.
This ragtag group of improvisers pops up and it's like, can we get a word?
And we did a guessing game where someone committed a crime in a museum, and the crime was someone pooped in Queen Victoria's toilet at the Victoria and Albert, as one does when you sneak into the Victoria at the V&A. And people, they lost their minds.
Yeah.
And because it was catharsis, it was a release of tension that had been built.
When I do want to recognize that I love being in the grand presence of all three of you today for this comedy show. And with what Brenna just shared, Ali would love some thoughts in terms of, is there something special about going to your local comedy show and laughing with other people?
Absolutely. In November, the week of the election, that Friday, we had one of our busiest nights at the theater. And it was just people needed to have that release to come out and just laugh without the expectation of like the commentary around it. And so it's a very healing thing for people to be able to just get together and have a good laugh and forget about things for a little bit.
Well, we appreciate you sharing all of the laughs today. I want to thank our guests, Ali Rivera and Brenna from CT Improv. You can check out their improv troupe at Hartford. Thank you so much, Brenna and Ali, for being with us today.
For having us.
Thanks so much.
And also with us was Sophia McLennan, who's the professor of International Affairs and Comparative Literature, as well as director for the Center of Global Studies at Penn State University. Thank you so much, Sophia, for being with us as well.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. Thank you all so much for listening, and happy laughing, everyone. It's also our annual February fund drive. Consider supporting Where We Live and all of your favorite programming with a donation. Treat yourself or someone you love to some Valentine's Day roses. Our gift to you when you donate. And I will be right back to tell you more.